Hi there, welcome to Business Live. Coming up tonight, Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia reiterates government's commitment to give about 70% of contracts to local entrepreneurs. Also coming up tonight, Universal Merchant Bank, UMB, establishes Center for Business and Incubator to facilitate government's private-public partnership agenda. Also, cybersecurity expert re-emphasizes call for public and private sector businesses to step up mechanisms to forestall cyber system attacks. The details of all these stories and more coming up in this half hour of Business News.
Business Live today.
My name is Darokar. Thanks for being with us tonight. Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia has reiterated government's commitment to give about 70% of contracts to local entrepreneurs. According to the Vice President, this is part of measures by the new administration to transform the country's economy domestically. He said this as part of his keynote address at the opening of the National Policy Summit in Accra. We're bringing you that in a bit, but Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta has also been speaking at that summit. He says there's a need to ensure sustainability in the country's debt management approach. This, he reiterated, will be pursued through the introduction of new processes for external debt financing. As I've been telling you, he's been addressing the maiden edition of the National Policy Summit, which began today at the Accra International Conference Center. The two-day event is to afford selected ministries the opportunity to engage stakeholders on specific policies and how they'll be implemented.
We are now at 72-point-something% of GDP. And as I mentioned, we cannot go on like that. How do we reverse the deficit of primary balance to a surplus balance so we can reduce our debt stock? And when your primary balance is negative, it means you need to borrow to do other things, including even paying your interest. So we have to do that. And part of the solution is in reprofiling our debt to reduce the risk in our debt portfolio, to give us space to be able to operate, and we have begun that process, and we shall continue. We were able to execute $2 billion a few weeks ago, and there's $28 billion to go as to how to change the tenor to long term, to give us some space, and also to signal to the world that the world is beginning to believe in a long-term engagement and move us beyond 10 years to 15 years. We need to introduce new processes for external financing of projects. I think most of my colleagues and various citizens are seeing a lot of interest of people coming in, offering to give us all sorts of debt in one shape or the other.
The Finance Minister also apologized to those affected by the recent pruning of the public sector wage bill. He acknowledged that some toes might have been stepped on in the process, but emphasized it was a necessity. Ken Ofori-Atta said the exercise would save about 1 billion cedis on the public purse when effectively carried out.
We have to stay within appropriation and control in the wages. We did an exercise recently in which quite a number of people were taken off the payroll. We've had, some remarks from some unions, but the real question for all of us as a country is that we know that there's some rot in there. We know we have to take some action. And in the process of taking an action, a few wrong eggs will be broken. we should apologize for that. But in terms of principally understanding, appreciating, and working over towards a solution, I think that should be the spirit of which our labor partners talk to us. We are not, I don't know the various names who may or are wrongly, and I think going through the numbers, I actually found one or two of the directors at Ministry of Finance being included in that list, though they don't exist. So there are mistakes, which is okay. But truly, we are talking about 600-700 or maybe $1 billion cedis of potential savings. I think it's incumbent on all of us to work in that spirit, because we at the ministry have no personal interest in individual names, but in making it efficient. Because if we also pursue the investigation, I think it would be really embarrassing to realize that your young friend Kojo Kwame in Elubu is actually able to continue to pay 3 other people and put that money in his pocket. I'm not sure the labor unions are trying to support that type of action. So we do apologize for those who should not have been in, but I think we should all be resolved that we are going to clean up so that individuals do not privatize this business. So I'm quite excited about what we are doing, the beginning of the negotiations with labor, and I think we'll come up with something that will make the nation proud in terms of looking at the long term and gunning for a way in which we make sure the macro matrices are good, and then we can work with productivity as a major index for negotiations.
So we can now listen to the Vice President speak about government's commitment to give about 70% of contracts to local entrepreneurs.
Has so many assets, including assets which are uncompleted projects. But we always talk in terms of our liabilities. We owe so much. But we don't talk in terms of our assets. We have so much in terms of assets, but we are really getting very little out of those assets. Those assets are essentially dead capital. There's very little out of them that we get. Many other countries, those assets are grouped as part of a portfolio and leveraged to actually raise a lot of capital. But we have billions of dollars in terms of assets, buildings and factories and all sorts of assets that we have as a country. And this is why we have said that we are going to form the Ghana Asset Management Corporation that will put together all of the assets of the country. And you can just imagine, and make sure that you bring life to this dead capital. We have a lot of assets, but we are not leveraging those assets to be able to finance. It's like building a house that you don't have the documents for. After you've built the house, that asset is dead capital. You can't use it to raise any money. You can't use it to raise any money. But if you are able to put it together and have the title and all of that, you can mortgage it, raise money, and finance other types of industry. So we are moving to implement also the Ghana Asset Management Corporation, where we will bring all our assets together and manage them properly.
So you had the Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. My colleague, Ebenezer Sabute, followed the Policy Summit for us, joins me in the studio. Let's talk a bit more about what the Vice President was saying there about giving 70% of contracts to local entrepreneurs. What did he say with regards to that?
Okay, Darrow, yeah. The Vice President was trying to give out some of the measures they are putting in place to ensure that our local entrepreneurs and businesses are able to stand on their own. So he was like, the current administration is trying to put up a policy such that 70% of all government contracts are going to be reserved for local companies. Not just local companies, but local and indigenous companies. You all know that we have certain local companies, but when you come into the country, they said local companies, but it's not managed or run by our locals. But in this case, they are reserving it for local indigenous companies, such that when you are a local company, you are managed by a local person or a management, and whatever you are doing is basically local. So that's the kind of policy measure the new government or the new administration is trying to push in order to make local businesses and local entrepreneurs strong in our economy.
Okay, so this is the first such national policy summit. I mean, why did we have to hold such a summit? What was the motive behind holding it?
Okay, the main motive behind this policy is that, normally when budget statements are being read, or even the president goes to parliament to give the State of the Nation's address, it's only the 275 members of parliament who get the opportunity to debate the budget statement. You and I don't get the opportunity to look at what issues are in the budget and how they affect us. But this policy summit kind of give opportunity to the general public and also captains of industry to come in to give recommendations to what measures government is putting in place to grow the economy. Not only that, but the general public in a whole, ranging from those who have businesses and those who don't have business. We had an instance where unemployed graduates came in there to give out certain recommendations or what they think the government can do to get them employed into the system. So it's just to give out the measures or policy measures that government is doing for the state, for the general public.
Yes, and even we've got quite a number of speakers today. We had the trade minister speak about a resilient economy, the need for a resilient economy if government's industrialization agenda is to be achieved.
And the flagship program, the industrialization program, as you mentioned it, one district, one factory. There's no place where the trade minister speaks without mentioning the one district, one factory. So I will say it here that the one district, one factory runs through almost, all the discussions. We had the Deputy Minister of Local Government in the person of Honorable Obi Amwa also speaking about it. We have the Chief Executive of the GIPC, that's the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, in the person of Yofi Grant, also speaking about it.
Okay, so I think that we can watch the Trade Minister, Alan Tremantin, speak about the need for a resilient economy if government's industrialization agenda is to be achieved.
I want my constituents, the private sector, to be able to interrogate issues like the interest rate. How are we going to bring interest rates down to make our industries competitive? I want you to be able to interrogate the issue of inflation, because by definition, inflation reduces the purchasing power of consumers, and that affects your own competitiveness also. I want you to be able to interrogate the issue of debt management, because the level of debt invariably also affects the level of interest rates, and it all becomes one vicious cycle. The minister has talked about revenue. So whilst he interrogates, I want also the private sector in particular to ponder and think about how we can fulfill our commitments in terms of tax obligations to enhance revenue. I want you to be able to interrogate the issue of expenditure, as the Ministry of Finance is talking about. Because if we are unable to deal with expenditure, then obviously that provides the fiscal imbalance that we are all having to deal with. If we are unable to interrogate the issue of wages properly, it affects the performance of the private sector. So if we can, in this particular session, try and focus on how do we fix our macroeconomic framework before we even get into a more substantive discussion on the productive sectors. Because otherwise, I can assure you that many people, obviously, what they want to hear is, what are we doing in agriculture, what are we doing in industry, and so on and so forth.
All right, so that was the trade minister, and those are high-profile people we've been hearing speak today. I'm wondering, for people who trooped there to listen to these personalities, what did they make of the policy summit? What views did they express?
Okay, I think general assessment, if you ask me, is that, well, it's a good thing. I mean, this is the kind of things that we need to be having frequently, so that the people can also have a say in whatever policy measures the government is putting in place. The government can also have, I mean, the opportunity to highlight most of its agenda to the people. So people seem to welcome the idea. All right, Ibn Sabute, thanks as always. Now, we are moving on. Universal Merchant Bank, UMB, has established a center for businesses and an incubator to facilitate government's private-public partnership agenda. Known as the Center for Businesses and PPP Incubator, it is expected to see improved engagement with local businesses which want to patronize government's one district, one factory policy. There's more in this report.
The grand opening of the UMB Center for Businesses and UMB PPP Incubator Center was as a result of the bank's commitment to be an intermediary between government and the private sector in the one district, one factory policy. Chief Executive Officer of UMB, John Ewua, is confident the business center will provide small-scale enterprises the needed loan and advisory services on how best to become partners in the ongoing one district, one factory program. He explains the newly established center will ensure value for money for local businesses in government's flagship program.
We have actually been inundated, except that we don't want to also go ahead of ourselves. So we are assisting them in various ways. What we've seen is the initial requests have not even been funding. It's been on the other things that we talked about, which is more of advisory and how to put their proposals together to the government, how to even start the whole process. And as you can see, where we are having this interview is a training facility where we train them on the basic business skills of succession planning, of business strategy development, and all the other things that they need to be successful at whatever business they are into.
Deputy Trades Minister Honorable Robert Ahom-Kalin is hopeful the UMB Center for Businesses will go a long way to boost the SME sector in the country. He tells Joy Business government was confident about the ability of the center to raise SMEs with the needed proficiencies and expertise to make the one district, one factory policy a reality.
Industrial transformation is a process that requires many stakeholders, and one of the key stakeholders in that is the banking and financial services industry. As you know, this government's objective and belief is the private sector is the engine of growth. So the government's role is to provide the environment, the infrastructure to allow the private sector to flourish. Now, to do that, one of the key stakeholders has to be the financial services sector, because they are the ones that provide facilities. Without this kind of a center, without this kind of facility that has been put in place here today, we will not be able to further our ambitions, and Ghana will not be able to achieve its ambitions.
The UMB Center for Businesses and PPP Incubator is the first established client service provider partnering government and the private sector on the one district, one factory policy.
Meanwhile, the Deputy Minister for Trade and Industry, Robert Ahom-Kalin, says urgent financial institutions to put a stop to the practice of demanding collaterals from SMEs before extending credit. Most SMEs have failed to attract the necessary credit from some commercial banks because they failed to meet the collateral requirements. This, the Deputy Trade Minister believes, could cripple the sector if the banks fail to soften their conditions regarding the issuance of loans.
Financial institutions lend against security. So what they do is you want to borrow money and they tell you how many houses do you have, what do you have, and that's what they lend against. Now, in that kind of environment, it is very difficult to grow your economy because by definition, SMEs often do not have those kind of securities. Now, in order then for us to move some of that dialogue towards a situation where banks lend against cash flow, i.e. they look at your business proposal and then decide whether on this business, on the balance of average, are you able to produce the cash to pay us back? This is the kind of thing that requires this kind of center and change of mindset, because that's a very different way of financial services and something we're not used to. Mostly what we lend here is against security. So when you bring in advisory services, when you bring in a center that focus is to try to understand the businesses that makes it easier for them to begin that transition from an asset-based finance towards a cash flow-based finance. And that is critical if we're ever to achieve where we want to go. Banks used to come and knock on your door to borrow money, to lend you money. And that is the mindset we want to get. But in order to do that, clearly we have to have a disciplined monetary and fiscal policy, and that's something the Minister of Finance is very, very focused on. But in order to get to that journey also, we need to make sure the very nature of financial services changes.
You're watching Business Live on the Joy News channel. We are taking a short break. We'll be back.
Business Live today.
Welcome back to the program. Now, a cybersecurity expert has called on public and private sector businesses to step up mechanisms to forestall cyber system attacks. The call follows a global virus attack that hit about 150 countries over the weekend. Speaking to Joy Business, Principal Consultant of Cybersecurity and Investigations Bureau, Albert Enchiboisiako, said the recent happening should be a wake-up call for Ghanaian businesses to upgrade their security systems. That's our interview of the day.
Interview of the day.
Businesses should, one, adopt a culture of security, cybersecurity, and that's one. That means there should be certain standardization and enforcement. Standardization means what kind of tools are you using, not just an ordinary tool, but also not just putting the tool together. We need to put certain enforcement mechanism. Policy-wise, we need to do to ensure that those who have been entrusted to protect the infrastructure are doing the right thing. That means if you employ an IT head or information security manager, the person has to report monthly and ensure that the right security practices are conducted. That is key. But look, the human component of this is also key. And for me, that is fundamental. Businesses will need to develop information security awareness training programs for all employees. Else the emails will come in. They are malicious, but employees will still click them. It doesn't matter how many years of experience people have had in the organization. The IT challenges are quite complex, and you need to run them through organization. But businesses should adopt a culture of cybersecurity. My worry is criminals operating the sub-region is going to take advantage if this culture of cybersecurity doesn't change. And that is the dimension that I want us to look at as far as we want to protect businesses.
So when you cast your eye around, I mean, roughly speaking, looking at Ghanaian businesses, looking at the issue of cracked software and then the ignorance, I mean, should this actually hit here? What percentage of businesses do you think would actually become fallen?
Oh, I believe at least 40 to 50% of businesses here will fall victim to that. The culture of cybersecurity around some of this infrastructure is not quite good. Individual businesses is not. That is not. Both across the government sector and also private sector environment. The security best practice standardization is not. The kind of software that we are using, the upgrades that we need to do, the necessary enforcement that we need to do is not good. Okay, some businesses are doing well, but generally, at least half of organizations are likely to suffer such attacks.
Interview of the day.
We want to bring you now a quick update on the stocks and how we started the week. I'm joined on the phone line by Betha Tubiga of Gold Coast Fund Management. Betha, how did we start the week and where should we invest our monies?
Okay, thank you very much for your time today. This week we are looking at 5 equities: BCB, EPI, DOPP, Standard Chartered Bank, and FML. And the reasons why we're actually looking at these equities, especially GCB, that's Ghana Commercial Bank, formerly Ghana Commercial Bank, it has remained our top stock pick for the past 15 weeks. And if you look at the performance of the equity, it has returned about 46.07% to investors currently. And there's so much demand. Though it lost last week on the stock market, there's still so much demand on the for the equity on the exchange. And looking at the demand, people are also putting premiums on the buy side of this equity, and that could actually show up its price on the exchange again. So we're looking at it gaining again this week, despite the losses recorded last week. So it happens to be our top stock pick, that's BCG. And ETI, like I mentioned, is a very liquid equity on the stock market, and a lot of retail investors going for these equities. And it's one thing that you can easily buy or sell off on the exchange. It has also returned 20% to investors, and it's one of the equities that has actually posted strong earnings growth in 2017. So it's an ideal buy for the short-term gains on the stock market. So we recommend ETI as a buy as well. And DOPP is currently the highest gainer on the Ghana Stock Exchange. We released very impressive earnings reports for 2016 full year, and then if you look at their net profit, the net profit and then the revenue. Revenue went up by 27.89%, and then profit by 18.77% respectively. So far this year, it has returned 68.27%. That's the highest that we have on the Ghana Stock.
I think we may have lost Bertha to get there, but thanks anyway for that update. And that pretty much does it for our show tonight. My name is Daryl Kwao. We'll see you same time tomorrow.